Oh, buddy. Here we go. Another day, another chaotic mess. So nothing special here if you're joining in right now, or if let's see, you watch this in the future. It's a good little documentary of what's happening on uh on March 5th, 2026. What a year. What a start. For those of you that are aware of what's happening in the world, hold on. Nice.
Microsoft Teams meeting vertical bar Widget 75 degrees Fahrenheit sunny button off. Widget 75 degrees Fahrenheit sunny button off. To activate, press space bar. Quick settings. Y-5 button. Microsoft Teams meeting vertical bar Join now button. Join now with camera on and mic on. To activate, press space bar. Join now. Cancel button. To activate, press space bar. Video options toolbar. Turn camera off left. Audio options group. Unmute mic left parent control plus. Microsoft Teams meeting vertical bar
Yes, we can hear you, Isaac, now. Yes.
I had an emergency. All right. There we go. Let's do this. I need some background music. Need to focus in. Okay, so as I was saying, if you've been living under a rock, probably you've been doing yourself a favor. World's at war. Conflicts in the Middle East. Got our Iran war theater over here. Got some monitor cameras running so we can keep an eye on all the chaos that might be happening. And of course, good old Bloomberg. Keep us informed on the market. Everything looks fine. There's going to be some on and off loading happening with these. It's kind of annoying. Why are you guys loading so much? I'm overloading my network with all this stuff. Oh yeah, because I'm also streaming at the same time. Oops, this is gonna be fun. So on the top left, you're gonna see the current stuff happening. The latest developments. There's an air alert in the RAF. Precautionary measures, possible attacks happening. Footage released on an oil tanker near Kuwait was struck by an Iranian unnamed surface vessel. Let me see how it looks like on the live, honestly. And you're also going to see that hack map on the left side. I always like to include a little hack map, show what's happening in the cyberspace. And below the hack map is the trait of, gosh, what is it called? Hanu. Basically, I can't remember the name of it. I'm horrible at geography when it comes to the Middle East. Basically, this is the path where ships are moving. And you can tell right now, so much chaos happening in the pathway. Right here. That all the ships are just staying away. They cannot pass. Oil tankers, shipments, all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of chaos happening there. That's down here. That's the location. Oh, whoops. Oh no. I wanted to scroll down, not out. Okay. Also, a couple of hotspots. Honestly, Ukraine's popping up again. That's not good. Russia might be taking the opportunity to go a little crazy up there. With having some issues in Sudan, there's actually people having like a developing civil war potentially going to happen. Not good. A lot of chaos, man. A lot of chaos. Where am I streaming to? Hold on. Isn't that working? Oh, wait. It is. It's just not on the search. Yeah. Also, let me check the sound, because what if it's really annoying? Really loud? Feel free to let me know. I got multiple headsets over here trying to figure out my sound quality. How's it sound? Okay, it's good. It's in the background. That's what I want. Okay. So this is what I do every day. Welcome to my world. Every morning, waking up, seeing what the world is doing. This is my control panel. And I've put it all on a nice, neat little screen over here, over there. So you can see, hopefully it's neat. Text could be a little blurry. Let me see how it looks like. Because I am doing, yeah, Iranian airstrike. Yeah, it's a little blurry because the quality output. I don't have the bandwidth to go ham on this. Sorry, guys. Oh, wait, no, I can do 720. Oh, yeah, you can do 720. You can see a good amount. Yep, good. Okay, so it is visible if you upgrade to the 720 HD. I do have that streaming. Nice. That's probably what's killing my system, by the way. My network is probably crying. I should probably just kind of... I should do this. Hold on. I'm gonna... I need my HDMI. Let me change my TV as a second monitor so I can keep an eye on the screen. I need to organize. I have the YouTube running in the background, but I'm not even keeping track of it right now. I have to figure out where my cables are. I have like 50 cables. Hold on. Uh-huh. Yep. There it is. This cable goes in here. All right. Now I have myself a second screen I can throw over. Big boy. Oh. Oh, hold on. Okay. I hope I don't accidentally use my AI because I am killing my graphics card right now. If I make a query, it's gonna blow up, I swear. Move that over. There we go, nice and full screen. Okay, so it's totally visible. Nice. Actually, this is super good for me too, because I can see in the nice organized manner. All the bits and pieces here. Nice, nice, nice. Okay. Oh, maybe the other streams will start working good too. See what's going on the system. Senate Republicans vote no to halt war. Pentagon names fifth soldier killed in Iran drone strike. Trump says he will endorse soon in Texas. Oh no, it's all about those elections again. Here they go. Venezuela and US to work together on mining. That's a big thing. There's potential rumors of what's the word? Resource exhaustion, if you will. Not enough minerals, not enough gold, not enough silver. I have a theory that we've been using up all our resources on this whole technological scaling we've been doing. That right now we're trying to price discover, supply discover, just trying to figure out how much gold we have. So the fact that Venezuela and the US are going to work together after that chaos that happened there, it's been going, man. It's been going all over the place. We've had a little bit of chaos in the South Americas. Now we're going to have a little chaos in the Middle East. It's just a constant stage of chaos. Military activity. Spain, Italy, Netherlands join European naval deployment to Cyprus. My biggest fear is that we're gonna send so many troops out that the home front is not going to be defended properly, both Europe and the US. I feel like that's not good. I feel like that's almost an intentional attempt. Oh man, this is gonna get hectic. But who am I? Just some guy on the internet that's played strategy games all his life and understands how guerrilla warfare works. Hmm. Oil price rally. Oh, Iran war, oil price shock won't stop Fed pick cutting interest rates. Ooh, I thought he was gonna increase interest rates. I thought he was against cutting interest rates. That's an interesting twist. We're gonna be printing again. America shared their thought on the US-Israel attacks. Needless war. Iran now is a logistical battle. Whoever runs out of resources first. IDF conducts a precision strike in an apartment in Lebanon. Housing. Hamas commander. India news, India bat first and start strong against England. Okay, that's great. Sports. Love sports. Yay, sports. Good distractions, those sports. Barrage of Iranian missiles target Qatar. That's the weirdest part. Why is Iran just going insane on everyone, man? They're just destroying everything. They're like not even counteracting a specific retort. It's just destroying everything. Neighbors, friendlies, like you don't. If you're not a terrorist group, there's no reason to attack your friends, like Turkey. Like, what the fuck's that? Ah, Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz. That's the one. Keep forgetting the name. Hamas. I'm horrible. Hate me for it. It's alright. I understand. Some are saying they're going to attack China just because they're just shooting rockets everywhere, attacking their own people too. What's up, homie? Appreciate it. But that's not a. I don't mind. You can do it if you want. I don't. It's not a thing I care to do right now. There's more important things.
Topic has, being a big proponent.
Hmm.
Topic has, being a big proponent.
Hmm. I need to clean up some of these networks. Hold on.
Topic has, being a big proponent.
Currently sending out a lot of data. Not often do I do my dashboard, so give me a moment to kind of calibrate what's going on here. A lot of processing here. I do have charts open too. Hold on.
Of guardrails and safety more so than the other frontier model players. So from that perspective, that has helped them, with enterprise adoption. But in this case, it's the U.S. government, and you go back in the history of software companies. I mean, Apple has had some disagreements with the government where they were asked to open the platform. Same thing with Microsoft when it comes to national security, and they found a way to.
There we go. Wait, what do you mean? As soon as I open it back up on the same tab. What? Nah, son. Nah. But if I go over here,
just
it works.
make sure that the government has a good workaround. So in
but
this
if I
case,
go and focus on it,
compromise or.
And it stops. Why does it stop when I focus on it? That's weird. Let me refresh.
Morgan's headcount numbers are flat year over year, and really they've been reducing their workforce within the consumer bank, which speaks to what I was just saying before with the call center.
Yeah. We were just talking earlier that 2026 could wind up being a monster year for IPOs. We're just talking about Anthropic, OpenAI, SpaceX. What are the banks saying about
that's not good.
The prospects for IPOs in 2026?
Yeah, that is something that heading into the year, a lot of the investment banks were really enthusiastic about a pickup in capital markets issuance and activity, specifically with IPOs and equity capital markets, and also in M&A. You talked about some of the three headline IPOs that could potentially hit this year. That being said, there's been some volatility and turbulence in the markets today, so maybe that pushes things back a little bit. But overall, there is some general enthusiasm. And JP Morgan mentioned capital markets would be up 14%, about mid-teens for the first quarter. So there's hopes that could continue going forward.
Do you think that these layoffs will affect Morgan Stanley in competing with top talent? Because to Paul's point, it's going to be such a busy year, or is this par for the course in most banks?
Yeah, I would say Morgan Stanley is one of the top investment banks, particularly in technology, TMT, and they're going to get their fair share of deals and win a lot of mandates. Just given
Brazil
the fact that
too.
Really
What's going on in Brazil
within that industry? We'd expect them to do really well in 2026.
When President Trump was elected and took over early last year. one of
Temporal
the industries
anomalies,
that was really
earthquakes,
thought to benefit would be
GPS
the financial services
jamming.
industry. Much less regulation,
That's right.
rolling back some of the regulations that came out of the great financial crisis.
GPS jamming zones in
We have. So we've seen that directly
Brazil.
with M&A, with bank M&A. There's been more deal making, but also less red tape in terms of getting deals approved by the regulators. We've seen a few deals that just get approved with less than 100 days from announcement to close, whereas during the Biden administration, it took 300 or 400 days for that to happen. So much more streamlined. And you're also seeing, on the other hand, for the big banks, less onerous capital rules. So that means they can plow more of their capital into the trading businesses and lending. So that's going to be an ongoing benefit for the big banks.
All right, good stuff for the. He kept his word, and he has a lot of friends in global Wall Street. Does President Trump? So making good on those promises. Herman Chan, senior analyst, covering all the U.S. banks for Bloomberg Intelligence. Joining us.
wow,
Here,
satellite fires in Ukraine going crazy.
For our listeners in the U.S., a reminder: you can listen to us via satellite radio on Sirius
5.3 million displaced.
Access the world's only global audio business network, coast to coast, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg Radio on Sirius XM channel 121 is presented by Golden Crest Metals. Stay tuned for the latest market news and industry research. The next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence begins.
Between Ukraine and the Russian Federation commenced today. Temporary ceasefire enables the restoration of the off-site backup power supply in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Hope I said that all right. I think that put an N in there where it's supposed to be. I appreciate both Russian Federation and Ukraine for their constructive engagement in agreeing to another localized ceasefire. As they say. Novel interceptor drones bend air defense economics in Ukraine favor. That's the thing too. Economic. Ukraine's got a set of pretty sick drones, anti-air drones. Very defensive drones that they might sell to the Middle East, Iraq, and others to defend against Iran. Like, here's your war economics. Who makes money off of this? Where there's a need, there's a way. So now Ukraine is going to get money from selling these anti-air defensive drones, interceptors, to counter Iran. And they're going to make money off of it. So is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I couldn't tell you, but in a way, Ukraine got attacked. So it could benefit them in the long term. Pretty unstable over there. Russia-Ukraine ceasefire March 31st. Probability 3%. Yikes. Russia-Ukraine ceasefire by end of 2026. Higher probability 38%. Russia-Ukraine ceasefire by June 30th. Probability 19. We'll put meet with Zelensky. 1%. Yeah. That would be what grown-ups do. Talk with the people they have conflicts with, not try to kill them. So what's going on right now? Insane instability in the Iran. Trump praises his Iran war objectives. House expected to vote on Iran war powers resolution, but they didn't actually. The House did not approve to stop the war. There was major Republican for the war, so that's going to continue. Hooray. Oh, instability everywhere. Will US or Israel strike Iran? Oh. Again. What is he doing? Hold on, y'all. I need to assist my dude again, apparently. That's...
Sitting in for Scarlett Fu, I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, streaming live on YouTube and on Bloomberg.com as well. As Charlie was just reporting, broad sell-off in the equity markets. Let's take a look at some of the stocks on the move today. We can do that with Bloomberg Television's markets correspondent, Norma Linda. Nora, what are you looking at?
Well, I've got my eyes on American Eagle shares. That's ticker AEO. We are seeing the stock down earlier as much as 13% for its worst day since April of 2025. This is after the company said that the most of its profit will be generated in the second half of the year. So we were seeing a light first half of the year profit outlook. And net revenue for the fourth quarter did beat the average analyst estimate, but people are really just concerned about this idea of the forecast for the first half of the year. So you're seeing that weighing on shares today in trading. Also keeping an eye on Broadcom, a name that we've been watching very closely. This is ticker AVGO. We are seeing shares higher earlier, up as much as 5.9% in the trading day. This is after the chipmaker posted its first quarter results, topping expectations for key metrics. They also gave a positive revenue outlook. And analysts are especially encouraged by its AI-related revenue. So you are really seeing that buoying shares of the company higher. I mean, one of the bright spots in the market right now. But if you take a look at a year-to-date basis, this stock is down about 3.7%.
Yep, caught some of that tech sell-off we saw. But what I think is interesting about some of these chip companies is the visibility they have on their revenue.
Yes.
And so he's calling out revenue into 27, 28. That's some good visibility.
Right.
Usually what the market likes to see. You listen, you know that spring is coming. My first sign of spring, some people say it's like seeing a robin. For me, it's seeing a boat being towed back to New Jersey, and putting it back in its slip in New Jersey.
Because you live by the beach.
Yes, and I saw my first one yesterday.
Nice.
And I thought it was a little early to be leaving Florida for New Jersey, but I guess that's
I cannot wait.
what happens. I don't know. Mike McGlone, speaking of Florida, Miami, Mike McGlone, he covers all the commodities. He's our commodity strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence. Mike, we're seeing another spike higher today in oil with WTI crude up almost 6% today. How's the trading been in the pits here? Has this been orderly? Has it been panicky? What have you seen and heard?
For the first ever closing of the Strait of Hormuz, I consider it somewhat orderly. And so the front months are spiking as they always do. You see Brent getting to 85, took out last year's high. WTI hasn't taken out last year's high at 80 yet. But you look at those back to Dees. Crude oil, WTI is running $66. Before the invasion, it was running 56. And that to me is what's going to matter, because that's going to be the front contract when we get to the midterms. And I think Mr. Trump's going to want this pretty much wrapped up in past tense to say, quote unquote, Iran was subdued by the time we get there, and that should be just enhance what's been a bear market. But the key thing that's happening now is the major excess of supply from the U.S. is in the U.S. and Western Hemisphere, and they're selling forward on the curve, and they're just loving this rally because it's going to give them more chance to sell forward and bring on more supply and enhance that downward trend in prices once this war is over.
And traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has slumped, to your point. What would a sustained slowdown mean for global energy supply and maybe inflation?
Well, there we go. We all know it's 1/5 of the energy goes through the strait. It's shut off for now. And I think the risks of inflation really going up here are very much transitory, meaning this is a short-term thing. This should be over soon. I would not underestimate the U.S. Military's resolve, particularly our president, who cannot let his legacy go down with the war, I don't think. And the bottom line is, what does this mean towards the end of the year? What it usually means is these spikes in prices usually enhance the dollar return. And that's the key thing.
Back.
I was in an ag conference last week, and the main problem in this country is a superabundance
So there's
of
air
corn,
systems
soybean, and wheat. And we have a superabundance of crude oil and natural gas. Right now, it's really the rest
active
of the
right
world's
now
problem,
on
but I fully expect this to
Qatar.
resolve soon. But this is just enhancing that superabundance in the States.
Mexico is increasing too. What's going on around the world, man?
Logistics expert, but how
Stock
do you
index
close
going
that,
crazy. Wow, stocks are crashing around maybe. I know South Korea had some issues too. Security issue. GPS jamming zones. Mexico.
Well, exactly. I think that's the absolute right question, Paul. And it's a question of just clearing things up. The key thing that's also been happening.
Ethiopia.
Technologies are coming out. We're seeing that, US
Israel, we know.
knockout drones with
Happening
lasers,
exactly in
not
Israel.
just, other
Conflict,
missiles. So
information,
I think just a matter of time. It's the
critical
fog of
news.
war. But remember, the U.S. military had almost 5 decades to war game.
14,000 sirens?
Right now, it's a little bit
19
dicey. It's the
active
fog of
strikes.
war,
Well, yeah,
but
it's a
I think
hot
it'll be
zone right
cleared
there.
up soon. It just enhances their
360 crisis
size
briefing on the
and
U.S.
force.
Israel.
Lethal
All right,
weapons
buddy.
against
You
the
can
enemy, which I think is hiding
be
well.
quiet. That's cool.
We also
Thanks. All right. 360 crisis briefing on the U.S. Israel Iran. The U.S. war with Iran is reshaping Africa. Oh, Sudan is having their own little civil war as well. That's interesting. That's a weird connection. But then again, we have a lot of Islamic influence from the Middle East to the Africa, especially Northeast Africa. Missile fired by U.S. Israel hit 2 schools near Tehran. U.S.-Israeli war on Iran created a massive hole in the global airspace. Oh, well, air dominance, right? That's kind of the thing happening. What's going on with Lebanon? There's still a conflict area in there. Yeah, conflict zone. What's going on in there? 500 killed, 150 displaced. Cross-border artillery and rocket fire, targeted assassinations, high risk of full-scale escalation. Oh my god. Oh. Let me clean up some of my cropping here. Top should probably be 150. There, that's better. Inching up. There we go. Nice and clean. Today is heavy. Yesterday there was maybe only Israel. No, it was Iran and Ukraine was popping up on the instability index. Today it's like Iran, Brazil, Ukraine, Mexico, Ethiopia. Like Israel, Syria. Iraq is sending Kurds in, or the Kurds are trying to get through or something. That's kind of a rumor right now. 7 strikes, high severity. Thermal anomaly detected. Interesting. Satellite thermal anomalies. Pipelines, infrastructure exposure, military bases, 1 big pipeline. Oil's about to get a little bit unstable, guys. The cyber map is showing quite a thing. US, Russia, Amsterdam, Seoul, Dubai happening too. Whoa. See, the thing about the map here is just the activity is important. The locations can be spoofed. So if it looks like the US is attacking Dubai, it could be infiltrated machines that are using the US servers to attack Dubai. That's kind of the considerations we have to take. The geographical location of a hack, a cyber map, isn't as reliable on the basis of where it's actually coming from. Like Singapore to Hong Kong right now. Singapore is the center of a lot of attacks right now. Outbound. Hopping around a bit. Gotta organize this a bit. Wait. Huh. Yeah, I'm saving bandwidth. Don't have enough real estate for all these windows over here. Sheesh. Okay, there it is. There's my hack map. The list of current attacks. Heat map. Bring cloud function routing. Most relevant cyber exploits observed during the selected periods. TVE 2022. Oh, it's that old. Exploit prediction score 95%. Windows Linux code injection indicates an attacker attempt against remote code execution in the cloud. Vulnerability caused by improper handling of a crafted HTTP request. Ooh. Spring Cloud Function version 3.22. Older versions, it is possible for an attacker to provide a specially crafted malicious expression that may result in the remote code execution and access of local resources. System compromise. Remote attacks can gain control of the vulnerable system. VMware. This is a VMware virtual machine. Oh, look how that happened. Heavy on the United States exploitable factor. Top targeted industries: technology, banking, finance, healthcare, retail, hospitality, manufacturing. 3,000 in the last 24 hours. Daily trend decreasing by 9%. Last 7 days, 30,000. Weekly trend increasing by 17. It's slightly calmer. But not by much. Because right now, especially, it's going ham. Countries targeted: United States, China, Germany, in that order, Australia, South Africa, and Brazil. Top targeted industries: manufacturing, banking, healthcare, technology, retail, energy. I'm glad energy is at the end of the list, but that's still not good to be on this list. That's some critical infrastructure. What's the heat map about? 3D? Ooh, look at that 3D. No, we do 2D. What's the heat map do? I don't understand what the heat map does. This is, oh, we have a different set of stuff happening. All outbreaks? Oh. We have a botnet. Can we look at botnets happening here? If I can manage to see the botnet flow, that helps a lot. .NET Framework, Apache Strut 2. Don't see a particular set. It's not organized by the type of attack, rather by the attack itself. So it could be multiple types that have a botnet potential zombie. Router malware. TP. Yeah, I'll just keep it on all for now. crazy right now, man. Absolutely bonkers. Alright, we can get this guy to talk again. Nope, nothing happened in Bloomberg. What else we got?
Strikes on the capital, targeting what it says was infrastructure belonging to the Iranian.
Doing that thing again.
Authorities. According to an Iranian government agency, the death toll there has reached 1,230. These images are from the Israeli military, which has released images of what it says are Air Force striking an armed ballistic missile launcher in the Qom area of Iran and an aerial defense system in Isfahan. It also shared footage of what it says are intelligence-based strikes in Beirut and Lebanon and several command centers belonging to Hezbollah. While earlier, Israel could be seen gathering.
Why you do that, man? Come on. Reload it. We're literally on the lowest possible case. Come on.
Troops, tanks, and other military equipment on the Lebanon border. You're watching Sky News Today. Coming up, thousands of people in southern Lebanon flee as the Israeli military issues an evacuation order.
News in Dubai.
Okay. What?
Home. Jane Witherspoon, Euronews in Dubai.
All right, Witherspoon.
into the calculus.
It's a browser issue.
Whoever is selected as supreme leader, I mean, the process is going on right now. There are meetings with kind of advisory board that essentially will select the next supreme leader, and we don't know who that's going to be. That's really up in the air. There's also the question of the kind of control or the level of actual
Yeah, it sounds like a browser issue.
You don't see the same kind of defaults happening at the same frequency because lower middle market private credit lenders were substantially more selective in what they were investing in. They were able to be substantially more selective because they had a lot more deals that they could consider. But when you have to put a multi-billion-dollar fund to work and you got to do deals of $100 million
Brave
or
acting
more,
weird maybe
the
for
pool of
resource room.
opportunity of which there's firms out there looking to borrow hundreds of millions of dollars is tiny. In our economy, 70% of all business is small business. And so that falls into the lower middle market. But where most of the risk is in the areas where a lot of money was competing for a few deals. And so they had to be a little more lax in the terms of those deals, which increased the risk of an event like this.
Shana, first of all, red headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Traders boost ECB rate bets. Now see 75% chance of a hike this year. We'll have more reporting on that. Shana, as you talk to your clients, is there what's the allocation you think is a reasonable allocation to alternative investments for, I guess, your average client, if you have an average or kind of a model client?
So we're a big believer in 20%. Anything more than 20%, you can start to increase risk in a way that takes away from fixed incomes benefits from a risk return standpoint, because most of the time,
Industry is about a $5 billion a year industry. SpaceX, in previous discussions, has talked about a $30 billion a year opportunity in the Starlink business looking about
mais aussi transférer
structure that are being used to spread that out means less concentration on those targets that Iran sees as primarily the main places that should be affected, not to be used against Iran, both in Israel and the U.S. bases and infrastructure in the Persian Gulf countries. So I don't. I think the official line on them being false flag operation makes sense. We are yet to see what evidence there on the part of Azerbaijan and Turkey that suggests Iran is involved. They said it because they, I think, are overwhelmed with what Iran has done in the past few days. But I think that doesn't make sense from an Iranian perspective.
Sina Azadi, I want to get your interpretation of this. The suggestion being, at least as the message that seems to be going out within Iran, that these are false flag operations. That doesn't obviously identify who might have carried out the attacks, but nevertheless that it is not Iran. In your assessment, though, how likely is it that countries like Azerbaijan, countries like Turkey, and obviously the Gulf states, who have also seen their own oil infrastructure hit, we've just been reporting on one just in the last hour or so, how likely is it, do you think, that those provocations would actually encourage any of these countries to start attacking Iran when each one has said, no, we are maintaining a defensive posture in this?
Well, I'm sure that the Arab countries and the Turks and the Azerbaijanis have so far shown restraint, especially in the case of the Arabs of the Persian Gulf. But the public opinion in the Arab countries, based on what I know and what I've heard, I've spoken to my Arab friends in the region, is that their lives have been disrupted, and there's a sense of enough is enough. But the point is, and I don't think in the case of Turkey, I don't believe that Iranians would be interested in picking up a fight with Turks who are a member of NATO. But the point for Iran at this point is that if it's fighting the world's best military force and the Middle East's best military force, it doesn't matter if you're adding the Arab countries to the equation anymore, because the force of the United States is enough to overwhelm Iran's military forces. This doesn't mean that Iranians are not fighting back, but just the sheer imbalance of power between Iran and the U.S. Makes a decisive victory for Iranians very unlikely. So going back to your question, I think that it is likely that the public pressure increases on the Arabs, but I see it unlikely that they decide to intervene, because there is no need for them, and the U.S. and the Israelis are already relentlessly bombing Iran. Iranian cities have been destroyed, military infrastructure, as it was in your reporting, a sport complex was targeted in Tehran. So I don't think there is no need for them to intervene, but there's certainly public pressure rising.
Sina Azadi, Director of the Middle East Studies Program at George Washington University, and Hassan Ahmadi, an Associate Professor at the University of Tehran. Thank you both. It's just past 16:30 GMT. You're watching Al Jazeera's continuing coverage of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. I'm Rob Matheson. The Israeli army has been bombing areas across Lebanon. It's now issued forced displacement orders for areas in the southern suburbs of Beirut. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah has been escalating since the killing of Iran's supreme leader. Israel has also launched a new wave of attacks in Iran. Loud explosions have been heard in Tehran and cities across the country. State media say more than 1,200 people have been killed since the US and Israel began their assault on Saturday. The United Arab Emirates says it's responding to incoming missiles and drones from Iran. Intercepted missiles have been seen in the skies above Abu Dhabi. In nearby Bahrain, authorities say a fire from a strike on an oil refinery has been brought under control. And France has authorized U.S. forces to use some of its bases on French territory, but on the condition they're not used to strike Iran. American troops will have temporary access to the bases to help protect Gulf countries. The UK has also announced it's sending additional forces to the Middle East.
I can announce today that we're sending 4 additional Typhoon jets to join our squadron in Qatar to strengthen our defensive operations in Qatar and across the region.
Azerbaijan is the latest country to be impacted by this conflict. 4 people there were injured after 2 drones fell near an international airport. Baku has summoned the Iranian ambassador and has told its military to prepare retaliatory measures. Well, as we've been reporting, France has authorized U.S. forces to use some of its bases on the condition that they're not used to strike Iran. American troops will have temporary access to some bases on French territory. The French General Staff says the move is to, quote, contribute to the protection of our partners in the Gulf. Natasha Butler has more from Paris.
Well, there had been some confusion here in France over whether or not the United States was able to use French military air bases in the Gulf. Well, the French military have clarified the situation. What they are saying is that some US aircraft used only for logistical and support purposes can use some French air bases. But here in France, the French military are also saying that they have guarantees from the US military that those aircraft are not at all involved in any airstrikes on Iran. Well, the French President Emmanuel Macron has condemned the US and Israeli airstrikes on Iran as going against and breaking international law and rules. And he says that France will remain in a purely defensive position. He's had phone calls with the US President and with the Israeli Prime Minister and mentioned as such. He has called for a de-escalation of tensions, as has the French Foreign Minister, who, to his Iranian counterpart, also calling for a return to diplomacy. Well, meanwhile, France's defensive operations are stepping up. France is sending its flagship aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, to the eastern Mediterranean. It is expected to get there towards the beginning of next week. It is also joining forces with Italy and Greece in order to try and patrol the Red Sea to ensure those shipping routes there are safe. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
I want to go over to Brussels now. We've got a correspondent, Osama bin Javed, joining us there live. I understand, in addition to all the European countries who appear to be offering support, at least to the Gulf allies there, we now hear Spain is sending a ship to Cyprus.
Yes, this will be Spain's most advanced frigate, which is heading towards the eastern Mediterranean coast of Cyprus to bolster those air defenses and naval defenses. And it has come in the long line of European countries, including, as you heard from Natasha there, France, as well as Italy, who've indicated that they're going to be sending their ships in order to help their allies in the region, protect their assets, as well as provide more defenses to their soldiers who are stationed in the Middle East. In the case of France, it is also a statement that because France has been the only country in the European Union taking a very strong line against what it calls illegal US and Israeli attacks against Iran. It has also criticized Iran for its responses in the aftermath, calling them illegal as well, but saying that it can take a principled position against what it sees as an illegality, but also send its military forces to defend its people and allies in the region.
I understand that European Union foreign ministers have been talking to members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Do we know what came out of that meeting?
Yes, there's been much deliberation about what should be the European Union's response, and it appears that now it is shaping up to be a response of unity and showing support for their Gulf partners in this extraordinary meeting between European foreign ministers and Gulf Cooperation Council ministers. It was decided that they are going to continue to follow the path of trying to find a diplomatic solution to ending Iran's nuclear program, to try and de-escalate these tensions and exert their various spheres of influence, whether it's the United States or the Iranians, and again, tell their Gulf allies that they're going to continue to provide defensive support for all that is needed, including that support of the 4 years of battlefield experience that Ukrainians have had in the last 4 years with Europe's help against these drones. So there is an indication that the Ukrainians might be able to help, but again, that help will come at the cost of taking some sort of attention away from the Ukrainian side of things. So it appears that Europe stands ready, it's sending the right signals, but it is, again, more words, not much, because all that's needed right now is for them to be able to talk to each side that listens to them and try and find a solution, because it is not just for the expatriates and the soldiers that are stationed there. It appears that if this conflict drags on for a lot longer, it will be the economy which will hurt them as well.
Osama bin Javid there talking to us from Brussels. Osama, thank you very much indeed. Naveed Shah is a US Army veteran and the political director of Common Defense. It's a grassroots veterans organization. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. There's been a lot of speculation over the last few days or so about what the motivation and the targets, or particularly the ultimate strategy for the Trump administration is with regard to this action in Iran. But I want to talk to you about what impact, if any, that has on the troops that are there who are actually carrying out the fighting. How important is it that they understand what the motivation for this action is?
It's very important that the troops have a strong understanding of why they're there. And thanks for having me this morning. You know, when it comes to the Iraq conflict, the Bush administration spent a year making a case for why it's important for us to invade Iraq. In this case, what they've done is simply decided one day to start this bombing campaign alongside Israel, made no case to the American people, made no case to the troops, and the support for this conflict is falling. What little support there was is falling rapidly right now.
I see that you served in Iraq, and I think it was 2009 to 2010. You traveled from Mosul to Baghdad. Of course, with hindsight, we now understand that the Bush administration's motivations for moving into Iraq at that point were based on a false premise. What does that tell you about what we're seeing in Iran at the moment? How concerned are you that we could be getting into a similar situation?
I'm very concerned that we're getting into a very similar situation right now. You know, again, the idea that Iran was an imminent threat to the United States is wrong. Like they had no intention. The idea that Iran's nuclear program was a threat to anyone when they claimed we just destroyed it during Operation Midnight Hammer a few months ago. How could it continue to be a threat if it was destroyed? None of the evidence that they are putting forward makes any sense. It seems like this was a unilateral or bilateral decision between Israel and the United States, between Trump and Netanyahu, and it really does not add up. And the people in the region are the ones who are suffering, both American troops as well as the civilians that are caught in the crossfire.
If the US and Israel have multiple objectives in Iran, all broadly with the same priority, at this stage, none seems to be more important than the other. How difficult does that make it for commanders on the ground who are trying to strategize what they are being instructed by their political leaders?
It makes it really difficult for commanders on the ground to both defend their troops, defend their positions, and plan for the next phase when it's not clear what phase one was supposed to be. If the goal in Iran was regime change, how were we going to accomplish that? Simply by bombing the Ayatollah's compound, and then what? What was supposed to happen next? There is no plan, no contingency for day two, let alone phase two of this assault.
I mentioned the political director of Common Defense. It's a grassroots veterans organization, as we were describing it. Looking at the servicemen and women who are currently working in this theater, how concerned are you that at least some of them are going to come back with the same level of impact that you saw in the Iraq War?
We're very concerned that the troops that are serving right now are going to be negatively impacted by this war. In fact, we've already seen that, similar to Iraq in 2003, 2004, the early stage of the Iraq invasion, troops went in without the proper equipment, without the proper armor, without the proper gear, and they lost their lives as a consequence. And now we saw that a temporary operations center in Kuwait was struck. where 6 U.S. troops were killed. And again, it didn't have the proper fortifications that are needed to defend themselves from this barrage. It seems like, you know, Iraq all over again, and I'm very concerned that we didn't learn any lessons from the past 20 years.
We appreciate you bringing us the benefit of your expertise in this, Naveed Shah, so thank you very much indeed. Sri Lanka's president says they're going to start offloading 208 personnel on a second Iranian ship off its coast. And that comes one day after a U.S. submarine torpedoed a warship with nearly 90 bodies recovered by Sri Lanka. Iran's foreign minister says there were 130 people on board and that the U.S. will regret the attack. Manal Fernandez reports from the port city of Gaul.
And today kicks in a lot of the procedures connected to the survivors, the 32 Iranian Navy personnel that were rescued in the international waters just outside the coast of Gaul, southern Sri Lanka. There's also the sort of judicial proceedings with regards to the 87 bodies that were recovered in Navy search and rescue operations. Currently, the additional magistrate of Gaul is inside the National Hospital behind me to conduct that magisterial inquiry. This is very much part of procedures. We are still waiting to hear what the next steps are, but that's what's happening. Yesterday, very much the sort of initial reactions we heard from the Navy, as well as saw the bodies of those recovered being brought here. Let's take a look. Ambulances screeched through Gaul, Sri Lanka's coastal tourist hub, bringing survivors from the Iranian naval frigate Iris Dina to hospital. 32 sailors were rescued by the Sri Lanka Navy and Air Force after a distress call was received from the frigate around 40 kilometers off the coast.
We saved a group who were floating in the water. After investigation and questioning, it became clear they were a crew belonging to an Iranian vessel, and they needed medical attention.
Rescue crews scoured the waters for survivors, but sources said there were no visible signs of the frigate or debris. Early reports of a torpedo or submarine strike could not be confirmed for several hours, until this.
In fact, yesterday, in the Indian Ocean, and we'll play it on the screen there, an American submarine sunk an Iranian warship that thought it was safe in international waters. Instead, it was sunk by a torpedo.
The frigate and 2 other Iranian ships were returning from the International Fleet Review 2026, a multinational naval gathering attended by 54 countries in Vishakhapatnam in India. The United States says this is the first sinking of an enemy ship by torpedo since World War II. Back at the hospital in Gaul, the arrival of more than 80 bodies recovered from the water. Nearby facilities were cleared to accommodate the dead. Iran's ambassador to Sri Lanka told Al Jazeera the remains of the sailors will be repatriated. The grim task of dealing with the dead. But for many of those involved in this incident, lots of questions remain to be answered. Mina Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Gaul, southern Sri Lanka.
Air travel across the Middle East has been significantly impacted by the escalating conflict. Repatriation flights have begun to arrive in Israel, where missile warnings are frequent. The sirens blared across Tel Aviv as this flight came in to land. Iranian missiles have sent millions of Israelis rushing into bomb shelters across the country. And the conflict has put shipping at risk in one of the world's key trade routes. 1/5 global oil supplies pass through the Strait of Hormuz. It's also a vital passage for large quantities of gas, and that has mostly ground to a halt. Lloyd's is a major insurance company, and it says only 40 shipping vessels have passed through the strait since March the 1st. Around 1,000 vessels are currently in the Gulf and the surrounding waters. Around half of them are oil and gas tankers. The value of the ships alone is more than $25 billion. Union leaders are also saying seafarers have the right to refuse to sail in Gulf waters because of the dangers. One of the nations that may benefit from higher energy prices is Russia. Europe and others had stopped buying Russian oil and gas because of the Ukraine war. But now many countries, including those in Asia who depend on the Middle East for their energy supplies, may lean on Moscow to meet their needs. Dmitry Medvedenko reports from the Russian capital.
Russia is one of the largest oil and gas producers in the world. One huge advantage it has now, it's not in the Middle East. With Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz, disrupting global oil and gas supplies from the region, Moscow, with its vast resources, seems perfectly poised to step in. Except it can't, at least for now, due to large-scale sanctions imposed on it because of the war in Ukraine. Russian energy exports have been squeezed by the West, leaving Moscow with just a handful of buyers of its oil, notably China, India and Turkey, and it's selling at a massive discount. So the jump in oil prices would be beneficial for Russia, but probably not as much as it will likely benefit other exporters like the US. Still, there could be other gains. Europe has been phasing out Russian energy imports. It's still buying around 13% of its gas from Moscow, but the plan is to drop that to zero by late next year. Norway's energy minister says the EU has been very clear that they want to liberate themselves from Russian oil and gas, but then the events of the last 3-4 days have also been difficult. With the geopolitical situation we see now, I believe the debate will be revived. Russia's president says it's time to act.
Other markets are opening up, and perhaps it would be more profitable for us to stop supplying the European market right now, to move into those markets that are opening up and establish ourselves there. There is no political motive here. I want that to be clear. But if they are going to close us off in a month or two anyway, then perhaps it is better for us to stop supplies ourselves now.
Kirill Dmitriev, head of Russia's sovereign wealth fund, is blaming Europe for what he called short-sighted decisions. He's the one leading talks on removing sanctions imposed on Russia. The Middle East crisis could end up improving Russia's positions at talks on ending the war in Ukraine and lifting sanctions, now that Europe and other importers may be more interested in seeing Russian resources make a comeback. Dmitry Medvedenko, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
I just want to give you a quick look at some live pictures we've got from southern Beirut. The Israeli army has been bombing areas across Lebanon. In the last few hours, it's been carrying out attacks in southern Beirut. It's also issued a forced displacement order for areas in the southern suburbs of Beirut. That usually means that there is an attack imminent. China has set its lowest yearly economic growth target in 35 years. It's aiming for an expansion of 4.5 to 5% this year. That's the least ambitious target since 1991. President Xi Jinping is presiding over the National People's Congress. Communist Party leaders are setting out policies for the next 5 years. Economic growth has been slow, and that's due to a prolonged property market crisis, slow job growth, and lower consumer spending. And now the conflict in the Middle East is creating more uncertainty, as Katrina Yu reports from Beijing.
Roughly 3,000 delegates gathered here at Beijing's Great Hall of the People for the opening of the National People's Congress, where China's leadership sets its economic priorities for the year ahead. Giving his annual work report, Premier Li Qiang says the government is targeting 4.5 to 5% GDP growth and aiming to create 12 million new jobs. China also announced its military budget will increase by about 7% this year, as Beijing continues modernizing its armed forces. But Premier Li warned the global environment is becoming more complex, with protectionism and geopolitical tensions increasing. The war on Iran could have direct consequences for China. China is the world's largest oil importer, and about half of its crude comes from the Middle East, with around 40% of those shipments passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Any disruption there could push up global prices and threaten supply. At the same time, new tariffs from Washington could put more pressure on China's export sector. Beijing's answer is a renewed push for self-reliance, boosting domestic consumption, investing more in innovation, and strengthening green and high-tech industries. The government is also planning more stimulus, with a budget deficit of around 4% of GDP and spending projected to reach roughly $4 trillion. At this meeting,
All right. This just came to mind. We know South America was used by the fact that a lot of the South American countries are communist in form, or at least some leaning towards communism. And Russia and China took advantage of this sort of closeness between South America and their own economies, which in turn you can go into conspiracies of how all the immigration was an attack on the US by flooding the US market with cheap labor, disturbing the natural form of things. But companies love that kind of stuff anyway. They love cheap labor, so they're going to accept it. Politicians like Democrats started to just take whoever wanted to come in to come in. And then the whole lower wage, the whole pricing structure, housing market, goods produced, goods sold, because of this extra supply of people in the US that disturbed the natural flow. Okay. So we went into Venezuela and we said, what's up? Right? We took the leader, did the thing. Now we're taking minerals from them, or we're doing some sort of two-sided agreement based on the minerals. What's next? Well, that was China's and Russia's influence. We took that out. You got to think of a chess game. What's the next influence? Iran. They've been disturbing the US economy through the South American chain of immigration and the whole Panama Canal thing, too. Come on, that was the early cooking of this whole process, this whole thing we're going through now. Everything's interconnected. And on the basis of that, Iran is the fuel to the Chinese market. You disturb that, it's a fuel to the global market, don't get me wrong, but if you disturb that, you could disturb the economic effects internally. Prices go up because it's more expensive to actually move stuff around through gas and through energy. You do that, you could probably hurt yourself in the process with your own economy, but that would also hurt those connected to the Iran oil market. So potentially this whole thing we're seeing all over the place, going into Venezuela, going into Iran, it's all interconnected between this sort of shadow proxy war between the three largest countries, US, China, and Russia. There's something happening. And then looking at all the wars, we can see that these things have been happening for the last 3 years, since 2000, February 23, when a Chinese balloon came up over the US. Remember that? The weather balloon, quote unquote. That was actually a bit more of a complicated matter because after that Chinese weather balloon flew above and got shot down, they already had access, and a lot of internal hacking started to happen in the US. Databases breached. T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, 50% down, access to people's accounts and phones and all kinds of things. People couldn't call 911. The whole system fell apart. And they blamed it on the solar flare, quote unquote, solar flare that happened to only affect those three mobile companies, not a worldwide effect, not transistors on the top of like the electrical wires that we transfer power. Nothing else, not even the chips in the cars were affected. Nothing got affected. The solar flare was just so selective, it just took down AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. Think about that. And then a lot of hacking began from there. They couldn't hide it anymore. It was public database after corporation after everyone's data got leaked. So there's been this shadow cyber war that has been going on since like February 2023. There was a Baltimore ship that got hacked. I'm convinced that it was hacked, and they rammed it into the bridge. 100% convinced. We never heard about it again, but I'm 100% convinced that was hacked. That was that was sabotage through exploitation of the network. And now we're going into a full-out scale war because all of these places we've been going through are strategic places that have connections to China and Russia, whether through economic means strategic means, utilitarian means. I mean, we're even doing stuff in Africa, I think. There's a lot of investments that China has done in Africa that, you do a deal with China, you're going to be paying that debt, whether through money or through slavery. They don't care. Like, it's not a good idea to make deals with China, 100%, especially if you can't pay it. But there's a whole interconnected, like, theater scene that's been going on since 2023. I'm 100% convinced it's all connected. You can't prove me wrong. Or, that can prove me wrong. You can't convince me that I'm wrong. Anyway, I thought I'd put that in there. 2 cents.
Warned it would target the area. State media say more than 1,200 people have been killed in strikes across the country since the US and Israel began their assault on Saturday. And the Israeli army has begun bombing areas across Lebanon. It's now issued forced displacement orders for areas in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Some flights in and out of Beirut's international airport have been suspended. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah has been escalating since the killing of Iran's supreme leader. And France has authorized US forces to use its bases on the condition that they're not used to strike Iran. American troops will have temporary access to the bases on French territory to help protect Gulf countries.
Okay.
The UK has also announced that it's sending additional forces to the Middle East.
I can announce today that we're sending 4 additional Typhoon jets to join our squadron in Qatar to strengthen our defensive operations in Qatar and across the region.
Man, the UK is playing with fire. The UK is playing with fire. They've let so many immigrants in that they've become the party associated with keeping them appeased, that they can't even say anything about Iran because they're going to lose. The party's going to lose based on the next voting jurisdiction because they've depended on appeasing all of these immigrations for their votes, essentially hijack. This is like what countries do all the time. Every country does this. Any country that falls into a third world level of political feuds goes down to this level of using immigration as a form of maintaining power. It's happened in history so many times. You can even look at Rome. It literally happened in Rome. In fact, they went so hard in Rome that they even put the immigrants into the military, and then they couldn't trust their own military personnel, and everything fell apart after that point. Like, literally. Anyway, that's history for you. But the UK, even France, is like, they're like walking on eggshells, man, because if they piss off any of their constituents, I mean, not to mention that they're not going to vote for them, but they're very violent of the case scenario. They're very assertive in their new homes, and who knows what they might do, considering their beliefs and the 72 virgins bullcrap.
Of the holy month of Ramadan for Islam, where usually you would see people thronging the markets, there's lights everywhere, the evenings, are really busy. It's also a major transport hub with hundreds of thousands of people coming through on a weekly basis. That's pretty much grounded to a halt. People are told to seek shelter when these missiles are being intercepted, to stay calm and wait to hear from the consular. There's countries around the world scrambling to try to help their citizens either stuck there or living there. We also know that 6 people were injured earlier on in the morning from falling debris, which is why the governments are saying it's so important to seek shelter when this is happening. This was in a labor area inside of the UAE, and we know that Pakistani nationals and also Nepali nationals were injured there. So it's a very dangerous situation, of course, specifically from falling debris. It's putting the air defense missiles to the test, but it's also really testing other countries as to how they're supporting their citizens inside the country.
Laura Khan in Doha, thank you very much indeed. Well, as we mentioned, cities across Iran are under attack for a 6th day. US and Israeli warplanes are bombing areas across the capital, Tehran. Plumes of smoke have been seen rising above the city all day. Israel says it's striking government and military targets, but residential areas and civilian infrastructure have been heavily damaged as well. We're going to go to Al Jazeera's Mohammed Val, who's in Tehran. Mohammed, just talk us through the latest strikes. What are they hitting, and how particularly are ordinary Iranians coping?
Rob, just a moment ago, there were strikes around Tehran. Not clear what specific locations and targets have been hit, but there were large explosions that could be seen through the darkness of the night around Tehran, and that's just a continuation of what's been happening throughout the day. Earlier today, huge blasts rocked the city of Tehran, and huge plumes of smoke were seen rising up in the sky. And we understood later that some stadiums have been hit, some schools, some police stations. That's an extension of what the early targets of this war looked like. Now we have facilities that are public facilities, considered public, such as schools and stadiums and so on. 20 schools across the country since the beginning of this campaign have been hit. Also, government here talking about a series of other civilian facilities like pharmaceutical centers, medical centers and so on hit in this in these waves of attacks. Cities also other than Tehran have been touched. Karaj in the west, Zanjan also in the west, Kashan. This is throughout the day, but earlier today also the Iranian Kurdistan region has been hit several times, including in Sanandaj, where the state TV station was struck by a rocket or two during the morning. Fears there of people being killed and so on. The number of civilians killed is rising as we speak. More and more people today, they are talking about more than 1,200 people who have been killed. 6,000 people have been injured or hospitalized and so on. There are fears that this war is taking a new direction and it is going to be more punishing to civilians. Talking about civilians, Tehran is almost empty of its citizens. Most of them have left mostly to the north, and they are also suffering and fearing the worst to come because there is a lack of communication, blackout of the internet and other communication means, and there is a lot of fear of what may come because they don't know exactly how this war is going to develop in the next few days.
Mohammed, let's talk about some of the people who have been suffering under these attacks, because one would imagine there are those who have lost their houses, they've lost family members and so on. Is the government in any position to be able to give them any support or any aid when they're facing situations like that?
The latest we heard in this regard is that there is more than 21 metro stations that are going to be converted into bunkers for people to be able to take shelter there during the fighting. We don't know how that's being conducted until now, but also the government is sending messages to people that provisions are enough, the provisions in Iran, enough for people, for food and so on. There is until now, no disruption of electricity supplies or of water supplies, and that's reassuring for people here. But we understand also that because of the many who have left Tehran, and particularly to the north, there is beginning to be some crisis there, some lack of basic amenities in the northern part of Iran because of the sheer number of people who fled to that area, considering that it is a mountainous area full of wadis and deep valleys that where people could hide and take shelter and so on. So there is a state of panic, there is a state of fear and apprehension that probably things are going to get worse. Civilians are stuck in this, are caught in the middle of this, and because of the blackout, as I said, in the internet communication and also in other normal communications, people are unable to communicate with each other and know about their loved ones. So it's a bit of a precarious situation.
Mohammed Val talking to us there from Tehran. Thank you very much indeed. Well, as we've been reporting, Azerbaijan says 4 people have been injured after drones fell near an international airport. It happened in the exclave of Nakhchivan. Iran's foreign ministry has denied targeting Azerbaijan, saying it only strikes military bases belonging to its enemies. Azerbaijan blames Iran and says it reserves the right to retaliate.
İran tarafından Azerbaycan Today, a terrorist act was committed by Iran against the territory of Azerbaijan and the state of Azerbaijan. The territory of the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic came under fire from unmanned aerial vehicles launched by the Iranian state. The targets of the attack were civilian facilities, including the Nakhchivan International Airport and its terminal, a school and other civilian sites, all treacherously struck by Iran. The state of Azerbaijan strongly condemns this heinous terrorist act. Those responsible must be brought to justice without delay.
Israeli airstrikes have targeted the southern suburbs of the Lebanese capital Beirut for a fourth day in a row. Lebanese authorities have announced the death toll from Israeli strikes has now risen to 102, with 638 people injured since the escalation on Monday. The Lebanese group Hezbollah attacked Israel in retaliation for the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Israel has since been bombing Beirut and mobilized troops in the south.
My son went up to prepare iftar. There's nothing here. This is known to be a civilian building, and everyone here is a civilian. He went up for 5 minutes to get us the iftar, and the missile hit. Just like that. We're not hiding anything here.
This building was a civilian building without any affiliations. Our centre, the Youth Collective, is right across the street. We're a social services centre that tries to help people.
We're going to go to Bernard Smith in Beirut. Okay, tell us what's happening where you are, first of all, Bernard.
Well, Rob, the Israeli military earlier on today issued an unprecedented forced evacuation order of Beirut's southern suburbs. Just behind me there, that's an area of some 22 square kilometres just to the north of Beirut, just to the south of me and just to the north of Beirut's airport. And within it, perhaps as many as some 400,000 people. It's an incredibly dense centre of population, concentrated population centre. And since that evacuation order was issued in the late afternoon, the main arteries have been clogged with cars as people try and get out of the southern suburbs and into Beirut and further north. The city already full of people who've escaped from southern Lebanon after the Israeli military issued a forced displacement order down there. That's been enforced for the last couple of days, people coming north because that's been issued. So a lot of Lebanese forcibly displaced, 83,000 at least, according to the government at the last count yesterday. There'll be more now with those trying to get out from the southern suburbs. Also, the airport has been affected, of course, with most of the flights coming in now cancelled.
Bernard, thank you very much indeed. Well, reporting from Axios, Donald Trump is saying that he should be involved in choosing Iran's next leader. The US president believes Iran's leadership are likely to select the son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as the next supreme leader, an outcome he says is unacceptable. Politicians, meanwhile, in the US House of Representatives are due to vote on whether to limit President Trump's authority to launch a war on Iran. That debate is expected to start afternoon DC time in the coming hours. Republicans in the Senate have voted down the motion on Wednesday, and it means that for now Trump can keep ordering US forces to bomb Iran with no congressional guardrails. Manuel Rapallo's in Washington, D.C. for us. Is there any indication that the Trump administration is paying attention to what is happening?
There is an expectation that senior White House officials and President Trump himself are paying very close attention to what's happening right now on Capitol Hill. We should note that this is a vote that is expected to take place in the U.S. House of Representatives at 5 p.m. Eastern Local Time. That is 22 GMT. This is a vote over a war powers resolution that would limit President Trump's ability to continue in this conflict without explicit consent and approval from Congress. Important this is a measure that has already failed in the U.S. Senate. So in many ways, this is really just kind of a symbolic vote, more of a symbolic referendum. But it is important in that regard because this is part of that public pressure that the Trump administration has been facing, not only over the initial attack, which did not include that approval by Congress. The United States Constitution is very explicit in that it is Congress and Congress alone that holds the power to declare war. So Why is the Trump administration paying close attention? Because this is part of what they are doing to mitigate. They're listening to the criticisms. They're watching what's being said on social media. They're watching what's being said in the news media to mitigate and be able to try to rein in and take control of the narrative, because the criticisms are that the administration has not been clear enough, has not been transparent enough over what the operational objectives, both in the short term and long term, are regarding the U.S.'s involvement in Iran.
Bringing us up to date there from Washington, D.C., that's Manuel Rapallo. Thank you very much. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced he's deploying additional forces to the Gulf region. He says their purpose is to defend his country's interests and its allies. He also said he spoke to Donald Trump on Saturday evening, and he stressed the so-called special relationship between the US and the UK remains unchanged.
When Iran started attacking countries around the Gulf and the wider region, the situation changed. Iran has now fired drones and missiles at 10 countries that did not attack them. These are allies of the UK, where we have hundreds of thousands of British people, as well as British military personnel. Our number one priority is protecting our people.
France has authorized US forces to use some of its bases on the condition they're not used to strike Iran. American troops will have temporary access to some bases on French territory. The French General Staff says the move is to, quote, contribute to the protection of our partners in the Gulf. Natasha Butler has more from Paris.
Well, there had been some confusion here in France over whether or not the United States was able to use French military air bases in the Gulf. Well, the French military have clarified the situation. What they are saying is that some US aircraft used only for logistical and support purposes can use some French air bases. But here in France, the French military are also saying that they have guarantees from the US military that those aircraft are. Emmanuel Macron has condemned the US and Israeli airstrikes on Iran as going against and breaking international law and rules. And he says that France will remain in a purely defensive position. He's had phone calls with the US president and with the Israeli prime minister and mentioned as such. He has called for a de-escalation of tensions, as has the French foreign minister, who has spoken to his Iranian counterpart, also calling for a return to diplomacy. Well, meanwhile, France's defensive operations are stepping up. France is sending its flagship aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, to the eastern Mediterranean. It is expected to get there towards the beginning of next week. It is also joining forces with Italy and Greece in order to try and patrol the Red Sea to ensure those shipping routes there are safe. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
Well, joining me here in the studio is Danya Thafer. She is the Executive Director of the Gulf International Forum, and it's a think tank based in Washington, D.C. She's also a lecturer at Georgetown University. Really good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. We've just been hearing France has been authorizing the U.S. to be able to use its bases, but not for attacking Iran, only for defending Gulf states. We know that the UK is now sending another 4 tornadoes, I think it is, to Qatar to help defend Qatar. What's your assessment of the way that the EU countries, or some EU countries, are ramping up their interest in the region, given the fact there was the criticism that they have been fairly slow to react?
As I mentioned earlier, the Gulf states the Gulf states have many important critical infrastructure that is important for the international community and important for the Europeans. This changes the calculus of the Europeans when it comes to Iran, but also not only related to the Gulf region, but also the fact that Iran has struck Cyprus as well, attempted to strike Cyprus. And that specifically goes into Europe, which is also a problem. More than that, Iran has been striking Ukraine with similar, I think, drones and missiles that they have been using in the Gulf states. So I think, in general, there's a high frustration with regards to Actually, I'm sorry, the Russians used those missiles and drones in
because
in
Iran
Ukraine.
has been selling those drones to Russia as part of that conflict.
Yes, they have been selling those drones to Russia. And therefore, it has, I think there's a lot of frustration coming from Europe about Iran's policies in general and how it's countering their interests in the Gulf region, in Europe. And also, there are other issues related to maritime security, which, you know, Iran has mentioned a few times that they're not planning right now to close the Strait of Hormuz, but that is an option on the table, and that's very concerning for the Europeans as well. And also the fact that there's European bases in the Gulf. For example, the French have a base in the UAE. And so there's so many different considerations from the European calculus to why this is considered a threat to them. But as you mentioned so eloquently, the Europeans are still interested in defensive postures. They're not interested in getting involved. And so right now, it's a purely defensive approach. Could that change? It depends how much the threat threshold from the European perspective is crossed. And so, like I said before, I think Iran needs to be careful how it internationalizes the conflict here. And so perhaps we may see a change in strategy for Iran. I know that militarily speaking, there has been some talks about how Iran could be depleting its long-range missiles stockpiles. And that's a problem because that could move the war front to the Gulf, which is very concerning, I think, for international stakeholders such as Europe.
I want to ask you about the relationship between the Gulf nations and the United States, because the reason why, at least in part, why this is happening to the Gulf nations is because Iran says that it is targeting U.S. assets and U.S. facilities, bases, that are being hosted by these various countries. Now, part of that deal, the understanding, as I believe to be the case, was that those countries would get protection from the United States, that by having those bases, it would offer them some sort of protection. That is clearly not happening in this case. It's actually just made them targets. What do you think the relationship is going to be like between the Gulf states and the U.S. after the dust settles, after this is all over?
I think this is an interesting conundrum that you bring up. The issue is, you know, these bases were supposed to serve as a deterrence from the Gulf states' perspectives. Over the course of the last 10 years, the U.S. has been engaging less and less on that front, and the Gulf states have been quite frustrated about that. In terms of diversifying their security portfolio, it has been very difficult because there are not that many alternatives, globally speaking. So this period could really be a critical juncture when it comes to the calculus of having U.S. bases if they are not protecting Gulf interests and security. Now, the issue is the interoperability of these military bases, and the interconnection of the different military assets in the Gulf states are dependent on the U.S. So we're talking about to change this basing infrastructure would be very difficult, would take many years. And I mean, the fact of the matter is the U.S. still does have the most advanced technologies when it comes to missile defense, which is the most important defense, as we've realized here. Now, in the long term, to answer your question, there is a real concern in the region because let's say, for example, hypothetically speaking, and we're a long way from that, that the Iranian regime and the institutions fall. Would that dissipate the Iranian threat from the U.S. perspective? And what's the incentive of the U.S. to stay in the region for much longer? Because that's the main threat to Israel, and that's part of the reason that the U.S. is here in the Gulf. And therefore, in the long run, the Gulf states need to tangle with the question about will the U.S. even be interested in staying in the region, which could change the calculus here.
Yep. Daniel Thafer, we really appreciate you joining us, giving us the benefit of your expertise in this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thousands of people in Lebanon are fleeing as Israel's offensive intensifies. The majority are crossing into Syria. Obaida Khito filed this report from a border crossing in Homs.
As the Israeli bombing campaign on Lebanon intensifies, the humanitarian crisis is growing. Over the last several days, thousands of people have been crossing over from Lebanon into Syria, the vast majority of them Syrian. And we're